Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm in the Dundee Hills in Willamette Valley. We are in Oregon, sitting with Brianne Day of Day Wines, the owner and winemaker. Brianne, welcome, and tell us about Day Wines.
Hi, well, thanks for coming here, and thanks for asking about my winery. I started the winery in 2012, and at that time, started very small. I purchase all my fruit, so I don't own any vineyards. I source all my fruit, and I started with 2 tons of Pinot Noir in 2012, and currently I make about 6,500 cases of wine from 18 different varieties, sourced from all over the states. So I started off wanting to make single vineyard Pinot because that's what I learned in learning how to make wine. That's what I learned how to make first, and I thought that Pinot, and I think that Pinot is a very site-expressive grape, but from there I came across a lot of really interesting things being grown around the state, and based on my travels prior to working in the industry, I was interested in seeing what other varieties are like from different parts of the state and different expressions of Oregon.
So of the wine that you make, I know Pinot Noir is obviously one of the primary ones, being that we're in the Willamette Valley, but what other grapes are you working with, and what other wines are you making?
Sure. So from the northern part of the state, I make a Alsatian-style blend, like an Edelsvicker type blend that's Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Müller-Thurgau, and Muscat. I make a red blend that's Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Pinot Meunier. I make a skin contact orange wine that's Viognier, Pinot Gris, and Muscat. I make Chardonnay. I'm trying to think about what else is from the northern part of the state. I have a Syrah Viognier that's in barrel that I haven't bottled yet, that's from the Willamette Valley. And then everything else is from southern Oregon. So from southern Oregon, I make a Vermentino, Malvasia Bianca, and Muscat blend that's a pet nat. I've made a pet nat of Primitivo for 2 vintages, but I'm not currently making that one anymore. I do a blend of, it's like a field blend of Cab Franc, Tannat, and Malbec. All my blends are co-fermented also. And then I make a similar rosé out of the same varieties, Cab Franc, Tannat, and Malbec. I do 100% Tannat. I do a white Rhone blend that changes in composition depending on the year. So the one that I currently have on the market is Marsanne, Roussanne, Grenache Blanc, and Vermentino, but my next vintage will just be Marsanne and Roussanne. And I made a rosé out of Syrah and Viognier from Southern Oregon. I also typically make a co-fermented Syrah Viognier from Southern Oregon that's red. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, I make 100% Malvasia that's still Malvasia Bianca.
Wow, that's quite a combination of varieties. It's very unique because not what you would expect out of Oregon wine. So that's really fun. We're sitting here in your tasting room in Dundee, obviously your winery as well. Where can people find your wines?
Well, I'm just distributed in 19 states. So locally here in Oregon, I have distribution across the state, and I'm in a lot of mom and pop kind of wine shops, and also specifically a shop called Mom and Pop Wine Shop. That's but other shops that fit that description, as well as Whole Foods and New Seasons, and some of the more niche kind of grocery stores. And actually, that kind of template holds true for all the states that I'm in, as well as a lot of fine dining restaurants and a lot of wine bars and natural wine bars and things of that nature. So the states I'm working in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, the Carolinas, Florida, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, California, and then we're also in, I probably missed somebody in there, but we're also in Quebec, and I've sold my wine a bit in Belgium and in Russia, but currently my international stuff is pretty much just Canada right now.
Wow. I mean, that's great. 6,500 cases and you're everywhere. Yeah. So what is your first memory relevant to wine?
It's actually very close to here. My folks moved to this area when I was 16. They moved to kind of the suburbs between wine country and Portland, and I had no friends and a new driver's license, and I would either drive into Portland and I would always try to get lost, because you can always find your way back, but you find new things when you're, when you're going into uncharted places. So I'd either try to get lost in Portland or I'd come out this way. And the first time I saw vines out here, I thought it was super cool. I thought it was super exotic, because I grew up in the suburbs of Western Washington, and there was nothing like that around Olympia. And in a lot of the books that I read, there was always a lot of wine drinking. And, I was into, at that point, reading a lot of Hemingway and Steinbeck and stuff, and everybody's always moving around and traveling and eating and talking about wine. And so I thought it was super cool that it was here. And I had this kind of like draw to it. And even just the way that the vineyards looked, my first time seeing them when I came out here, they're beautiful in an extremely structured way. And it really just appealed to me, almost the architecture of the vineyards.
Very cool. So as you got into wine and have had the pleasure of drinking a lot of wine, what would you say is one of the most memorable wines you've ever drunk, and what was the occasion?
That's a hard question when you've drunk a lot of memorable wines. To pinpoint just one is difficult, but I think setting has a lot to do with it. And so when I decided that I wanted to be involved in wine, it coincided with a trip that I had been planning that was kind of an extended travel situation, and managed to travel around the world for 2 years to wine producing regions. And that trip generated a lot of really memorable moments. There was one time that was Christmas Eve. I was in Sydney, Australia, and I had been working for a vineyard owner, a winery owner, over in a little town called Mudgee that's in New South Wales, and had been working there just on the vineyard for the summer months. And we came and had Christmas Eve at his Sydney house, and he accidentally opened, because he didn't have his glasses on, a wine called Hill of Grace that's like a very famous Syrah from down there. And that was super memorable to me, because I'd never had a really expensive bottle of wine, and I knew that wine was like, $500 or $600, and it was like, ooh, oh, that's a big deal. It was cool to me. Through the course of that journey, when I was traveling, when I got to France, by that point, I was really interested in wines that were made from organic and biodynamic fruit, and that were made with native fermentation and what would be considered natural wine now, but nobody was really using that term back then. And when I got to the Jura, I met this guy, Freddie Foray, that was his name. He was recommended. I had a book from a retailer in Paris that I was following, and not everybody was in the book. And this particular person, the retailer, had just written his name in. It was like, you got to go see Freddie Foray. And so we went to his winery, and just showed up unannounced, unexpected, and described that we were, in our best terrible French, that we were students that were interested in wine, and had our first Vengeance from barrel at that point. And that was like freaking crazy. Like, I had never had anything like that or seen production like that. It was really, really different from everything that I had known about wine up until that point. And people talked about, topping barrels and minimizing oxygen contact, and then to see something that was made completely counter to that, and that tasted, totally different too, was phenomenal. What was also cool about that evening in the Jura was that Freddie invited us back after giving us a tour through his cellar and having us taste a lot of things. He invited us back, and we got to hang out all evening while he was opening all his new release wines for friends and customers and things like that, and basically just had a wine party with a bunch of strangers that, it was just really fascinating. And those wines were completely outside of the realm of what I was used to. And I had tasted probably about 1,000 different wines at that point in that journey. We were documenting all of them. But finding a region that changed my perspective on what wine could be that far into it was cool. It was very monumental.
Yeah, for sure. And at that point, you were looking to make wine, you were making wine. did you come back to Oregon right after that, or?
I wasn't making wine at that time. Throughout the course of the trip, I was trying to figure out what part of the industry I wanted to be in. And so I was working on vineyards in exchange for room and board in a lot of places, but mostly just tasting and traveling and talking to somms and talking to winemakers and all of that. And through the course of that trip, I decided that winemaking was the aspect of it that appealed to me the most. And then at the end of the trip, which was the very beginning of 2008, I came back to Oregon and started immediately working for wineries and going to school for it.
Amazing. So you've obviously traveled around and tasted a lot of great wines. So if we were to come to your home and go into your cellar, what would we find in there right now?
I mean, my cellar isn't deep, quite honestly. I buy a lot of things that I expect to drink that season, and then I drink them that season. So this is summer. The things that I've been drinking lately are, I had a really, really interesting Fiano that was from Italy and definitely had a lot of skin contact. It almost was the color of like iced tea. It was like a orangey brown kind of color with these really great aromatics. I always have some kind of a Riesling from somewhere that's always chilled in the fridge. And it's not, I mean, I'm not as much of a Riesling fan as a lot of people are, but I just find them to be really appropriate oftentimes throughout the summer. I had a beautiful bottle of white Burgundy at dinner the other night. So my head is very into classic wines in a big way. When possible, I like to pick up bottles of things that are made by my colleagues in the industry. So when I can, I like to try American wines that are from regions other than Oregon, because I know my Oregon friends' wines, and I don't drink nearly enough of theirs either. And it's a real treat when I can. But when I come across other people's from California or from Vermont or wherever around the country, I like to try to see what my colleagues are up to that are kind of grouped with me in the same category. But other than that, it's mostly pretty straight up European, like classic stuff. Like depending on the season. So
yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
I think that there are many perfect varieties. In fact, I think that there are probably pretty much the word perfect. I remember when I was working at Irie, Jason would talk a lot about wabi-sabi and about the Japanese idea of perfect imperfection. And I liked that concept quite a lot. It really is yeah, that makes sense to me. So to me, there's no such thing as perfect, but everything is perfect. You know what I mean?
That's a great non-answer. No. Okay. So I'll give you another challenging question. What's your opinion about wine critics and scores?
I think they serve a purpose. I don't pay attention to them in terms of what I buy. And I think any professional in the industry, especially if you're a winemaker or whatever, you don't necessarily need a critic to tell you. Just like, I don't know, if you're in the movie profession or something like that and you're making movies and you're a director, you don't necessarily need to read the reviews in order to figure out what movie to see that night. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. Like, you're like, oh, my friend made that movie, I'm going to go see it. And it's the same kind of thing. If you're a winemaker, you're like, oh, I made this wine, my friend made this wine, I know this region, I've been there, I know these people, whatever. It's not very useful necessarily to an industry professional for the most part, but I think to consumers they're useful, and just the way movie reviews are, that you're wanting to find something that you find enjoyable in some way, so you find a critic that matches your palate and you listen to them. I don't think that every critic matches every person's palate, and I think that I've read a lot of reviews that are based on critics that are kind of counter to my preferences. So that's, when one of them reviews one of my wines and they say something about it, I'm just like, they don't get it, whatever. But it's fine, and I just stop sending my wines to those people because it's like, well, that's not what they're looking for, so I'm not going to send my wines to them. It's not a big deal. But I think they serve a purpose, and I think without them in the industry, that a lot of consumers would be shooting a lot more blind. So, which wouldn't be a bad, I think. No. It would mean more consumers would have to experiment a lot more. But wine's something that costs money and can be kind of pricey, so it can be feel risky to people to spend a lot of money on something that they don't have any recommendation from or don't know what it's going to be. And so, yeah, I think they serve a purpose.
So I know you were saying you drink a lot of different wine and seasonal and feeling, but if you had to choose, could you pick a red, white, or rosé of preference?
Of preference? Probably. I mean, let me think about this.
As a category, not as a specific wine.
I mean, the only one that sprung to mind was when you said red, white, or rosé. Corsican rosés sprung to my mind. Of all the rosés in the world, I really, really love wines from Corsica, the rosés. Red and white is just too freaking broad for me across the country. I mean, across the world.
Well, I was saying more like if you had to pick between a red, a white, and a rosé.
No.
No.
I mean, I drink mostly white. I drink mostly white wines. I think I drink those far more than anything else. I don't because it's not healthy, but I could crush a bottle of white by myself. I can't crush a bottle of red by myself. Like, that's a wine I need to share with other people. Although I have crushed a bottle of red by myself, but I guess I can, but I don't usually.
Well, speaking of crushing a whole bottle by yourself, it usually comes with the requisite hangover the next day. Do you have any special tips that you can recommend to our listeners?
As I get older, hangovers become easier to get and they're way more painful. So my recommendation is don't get hangovers. Don't drink so much that you get a hangover. And that's what I really try to practice myself because it kills me. And I have a 2-year-old and he doesn't care if I have a hangover. So, if you are feeling like, should I have that last drink? I'm pretty okay right now. Don't have it because that last drink is always the one that's going to kill you. And if you decide, well, I'm just going to go ahead and tie this one on and just do it, drink a heck of a lot of water before you go to bed and, get up in the middle of the night and drink a lot of water and just steady yourself for the idea that you're going to have a hangover the next day. And that's just how it's going to be. But I recommend don't get them. Then that's what I try to do. So
yeah, the best way not to have it.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So then, with all the diversity of wines that you're drinking and the wines that you're making, how do you approach food and wine pairings? Do you feel that there are hard and fast rules to follow, or do you take a little more laissez-faire approach?
I love food and wine pairings. I have a lot of fun with it. I worked front of house in restaurants for a while, and that was something that was really fun for me as a server. It depends on the situation. If you're doing like a chef pairing menu where you get to choose a different wine for each course, then I think I'm fairly classical in my approach to it because those things make sense. There's a reason why seafood and Melon de Bourgogne go well together, or whatever it happens to be. Why you shouldn't have Cabernet and oysters. It's a terrible combination. But when choosing for at home, or if you're choosing like a bottle to match several courses, then I think you have to be a little bit more broad in terms of looking at how am I going to make one wine work for multiple dishes. And from that, I think about what is the lightest dish in terms of textures and delicacy, what is the heaviest dish in terms of textures and delicacy, and what wine is going to complement both of those two things without overpowering the light one and without getting washed out by the heavy one. And there's usually, you can find a wine that'll do that. And when you can, it's like, I don't know, it's a little mini victory.
Yeah, absolutely. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I think a lot of people have an idea of what Oregon is in terms of the wines here, and Pinot Noir is awesome. I make 4 single vineyard Pinots. I love working with Pinot. I'm never going to diss it. I think it's beautiful, but I think my lineup kind of demonstrates that Oregon is capable of so much more than that, and that those wines that are other varieties can be equally site expressive and delicate, or nuanced the way that Pinot is, that you don't have to just look to Pinot as being the terroir, the thing that is defining terroir for Oregon, that Syrah can define terroir here, and Viognier can define terroir here. And I've had really interesting Sauv Blanc from here, and Zweigelt and all kinds of things. There's a lot of really cool stuff. So the thing that I've tried to do with my wines is, Oregon is a big state. It's about half the size, geographically speaking, as France. And it would be silly to think that all of France could be defined by one wine or one or two wines, when France itself has, countless regions and wines and everything. So similarly, I try to think about Oregon as if we were like a country instead of a state, and all the different ways that these different wines can define the state and define the place. And that's what I look to my wines for, is to try to be little mini time capsules and place capsules of different parts of the state, and convey something different about it.
So if there was one wine, not necessarily picking your favorite wine, because that's like picking your favorite child. Of course, you have one because you only have one child right now. But if space aliens were to land on your property, come here to the winery, and you were to present them with one wine, which of your wines would you want to introduce day wines to?
I think probably, I don't know about space aliens, but if I have a wine nerd show up on my property from somewhere in the industry, and they're like, show me the wine you're the most proud of, and I get that question a lot, I'm very excited by a wine that I have called Tears of Vulcan. And the reason I'm so proud of it is because it's such a different wine than any other wine I've had from Oregon. And it was purely conceived in my head, and it was an experiment, the whole time while making it. And every time I drink it, I feel that sense of excitement and adventure and experimentation that I felt when I made it. And I just really enjoy drinking it. It's a very unique wine. So
very cool.
Probably that one.
So you're buying fruit from a lot of different vineyards. How much time are you spending in each of these vineyards and working with the fruit throughout a harvest?
Well, yeah, I work with about 18 different vineyards, and so for the most part, I'm not a viticulturalist, and I would like to be. I think a lot about going back to school for my viticultural degree, but I pair with growers who either match my philosophy about how wine grapes should be grown, or they are willing to bend a little bit on things and make some changes in order to meet those philosophical standards that I have. And so I'm not in their vineyards very much. There's the most time that I spend in the vineyards is in the summer, and usually that ends up being a visit early in the summer to see what the fruit set's like, to talk with the growers about how we're going to approach the season, what the expectations are for rainfall or for sunlight, and if we need to drop fruit or if we need to pull leaves, or what the approach should be. And then I like to show up again around veraison when the fruit starts to turn red, and talk about similar things. And then I try to be out in the vineyards relatively often near harvest. So that might end up being like once a week or something leading up to harvest to decide on pick dates. And so really the majority of my time is going to be summertime is when I'm in the vineyards the most. And with 18 different vineyards that I'm working with, everywhere from the very northern part of the Willamette Valley to the southern, California, Oregon border, and with being a single mom of a 2-year-old and, doing my own national sales and now I have 3 full-time employees, which is amazing. It's awesome, but that's a new thing for me. Being able to view the vineyard growers as my, surrogate parents, or what is it called when somebody is gets pregnant with somebody else for somebody else? It's a surrogate. That's what it is. Yeah, got it. Yeah, okay. I kind of view them that way and know that they're in good hands, and I don't need to be micromanaging. And also, they know more about growing their fruit than I do, so to micromanage them would be counterproductive and kind of insulting. So.
In the time that you've been making wine, have you established any sort of good luck rituals at the start of harvest for yourself or for your growing team?
I always buy a good bottle of grower champagne on the first day of fruit coming in. So, and we drink more champagne throughout harvest, but because I love champagne. You asked earlier, favorite wine. I mean, champagne is probably my favorite wine. So yeah, that's what we do. Yeah.
So you clearly don't have a lot of free time because you are a full-time mom to a 2-year-old and then you have a winery. But in your free time, when you have it, or when you have free time again, what do you do? What do you like to do?
I like to be outside. So I like to go hiking. I like to be at the beach. I like to be in the mountains. Anything that's outside enjoying nature, that's my favorite thing to do. So and fortunately I can do that with the 2-year-old too. I can take him with me and hopefully give him some of that love also.
So if there was a piece of advice that you could share with our listeners, what kind of advice would you like to give?
Okay. So I was thinking about this and I've gotten a lot of great advice over the years, especially, particularly about how to make wine and everything. But my backer one time told me something that he wasn't telling it to me as advice. He was just telling it to me as an observation on life. And he said that the best part of making a lot of money was giving it all away. I think he was saying it to me when I was, probably one of the many times that I was profusely thanking him for helping put my dreams into reality. And while I'm not in a financial ability right now to just give a bunch of money away, I think that that's good advice that being generous with what you have brings a lot of personal happiness to a person. And so I try to apply that as best as I can.
We can all apply that. So looking back at your achievements in your work, you've done a lot in a short amount of time and you have a long future ahead of you. But what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date in your work?
I am proud of a lot of things here. I'm proud of, it's been really amazing to see ideas become reality. And I was 19 when I first became interested in wine and when I became interested in travel, and that all set these things in motion, these ideas in motion that over years refined and became reality. And I guess when I formulated the idea of what I wanted this business to be, I wrote a pretty specific business plan. And when I met my backers, I kind of went full on with describing to them what the plan was, and they supported that. And so when I look around the winery right now and I see this manifestation, this physical manifestation of this idea that I had at one point and that I put down on paper, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty surreal sometimes to look around and be like, this is exactly what I described, 11 years ago when I wrote that business plan, and it's here and it happened and we did it. And it's very gratifying to see that.
That's awesome. That is really awesome.
Thank you.
So if you could imagine one person, any person, living or deceased, famous or not famous, if there was one person that could be captured in an image with a bottle of your wine in their hand, who would you want that person to be?
The first person that came to my mind as you were saying that is the writer Jim Harrison. I've started reading a lot of Jim Harrison lately, and I really appreciate what a hedonist he was. I have those tendencies myself, and I kind of relish those tendencies. So if I had a picture, a photograph of Jim Harrison drinking my wine, I think I would be very excited about that.
So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
I was going to say bread without butter, but okay, it's like a blanket or bed without a blanket. It's half done.
I like all those. So you're being sent off to a deserted island. What 3 wines do you take with you?
Well, now that we've talked about it, now I can really pin it down in my head. I would bring some really pretty grower champagne. I would bring a beautiful minerally Corsican rosé, and I would bring the red has to be something that can age over time, Is there refrigeration on this island? Because
absolutely.
Okay, good. Because I'd be very worried about the wines otherwise. I'd probably either bring, I'm going to give you two, either a bottle of probably Chambol or Barolo. And the reason why is because I think both of those wines require a lot of patience, which I would probably need on a desert island since I'm stuck there. And they also evolve a lot over time. And I would imagine I'm on a desert island, I'm kind of bored, so I need to find entertainment however I can. And so watching a wine evolve would be an interesting way to do that.
That's great. So now we're going to take these wines and a few of the others that you produce and play a little game of pairing them with music. Okay. You can pick genres, you can pick artists, or you can pick particular songs. That's up to you. But, a lot of times we're inspired by what we're listening to or what we're drinking, so let's combine them. So grower champagne, what would you want to be listening to?
Anything. I mean, I freaking love grower champagne. So, I don't know why this just popped in my head as an answer to that question, but Otis Redding. I'd want to be listening to Try a Little Tenderness, something that starts off kind of sweet and like you think it's going to be a certain way, and by the end of the song, it's gritty and it's powerful, and I think it'd probably Otis Redding for grower champagne. I don't know why. I think it's a good pairing.
I'm kind of feeling it. I get it. And the Corsican Rosé.
Oh man, that is just such a pretty wine that's just okay, I'm just gonna say what comes to my mind because that's all I got, right? So I'm thinking about the song Sloop John B by the Beach Boys. I love that song from a purely instrumental kind of perspective. When I have sat by the water I was in, must have been in Belize on this trip, and listened to that song while watching light play off the water, and there are so many pretty little perfectly placed notes in that song that I think that Corsican Rosé would pair extremely well with.
I think I have that song in my head now.
You just listen to it sometime purely as a melodic like not paying attention to the lyrics or anything like that. It is such a pretty song.
And what about your pet nat?
Oh, my mamacita. That is kind of a party drink. That's you could be hanging out in the backyard with a bunch of friends and having a barbecue or having a brunch and listening to some reggae or some I used to listen to this band in New Zealand, my first harvest down there, called Fat Freddy's Drop, which is kind of a electronic reggae kind of band. I guess those come to mind for my pet nat.
Okay, and for the last one, the wine you would be giving to the wine geek, the Tears of Vulcan.
Oh, well, look at it. It's it's Black Sabbath all over it. That is a heavy metal wine right there. You could listen to Nine Inch Nails, you could listen to Black Sabbath, you could listen to some Led Zeppelin, but not if it's too pretty. It has to be something kind of gritty.
I love it. That's a nice gamut of music that you listen to. So I know you're busy again with a 2-year-old and running a winery, but what is one wine region that's at the top of your bucket list to explore next?
Piedmont. I've never been to Piedmont. I've been to Italy probably 6 or 8 times, and I've never been to Piedmont, and I think it's absurd because I'm fascinated by those wines.
Okay, well, you're going to start planning that trip. Yep. I think when they're 2, they fly for free, so...
under 2.
Under 2.
Yeah.
You've got 2 days.
Right.
But before we go, and I want to thank you for joining us today, but can you remind our listeners how they can come visit you, where you're located, and where they can find you?
For sure. I am located in Dundee, Oregon, which is in the Willamette Valley. We are about 23 miles southwest of Portland. We are on 99W, which is the main road that runs through all of wine country. And our tasting room is open right now, Wednesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Soon we'll be open 7 days a week, 11 to 5. And if it's outside of those times, then just give us a call and we'll try to accommodate.
Fantastic. And so that's daywines.com. Brianne, thank you so much for joining us at Wine Soundtrack, and we'll be back.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the chat.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.